So this next set of lecture notes is about the immune system. So in the ninth edition, it's chapter 16 and 17. In the 10th edition, it's chapters 17 and 18. Okay, so the first thing, and some of this is going to be a review if you've had anatomy, but if you haven't had anatomy, it won't be. So innate is same as a non-specific immune system. So this is what we're born with. It's genetic. It's not going anywhere unless something strange happens, something different happens. So it protects you against any type of invader. So it doesn't matter what the infection is. Okay, and it doesn't care. It's just going to protect you against anything that's trying to get in. That's not self. Okay, then adaptive is specific. So adaptive is specific, and we develop it over time, and we develop it as we get exposed to different things. Okay, so now an antigen is anything that the body perceives as foreign. So an antigen could, usually they're proteins, but sometimes they can be carbohydrates. But it's anything that causes an allergic reaction or an immune response. So anything that causes an immune response. So it could be cat fur, it could be pollen, it could be something like penicillin. Okay, now our first lines of defense are things like our skin. Okay, so it prevents the entry, the mucous membranes, which we'll talk about here more in a minute, saliva, tears, the good gut bacteria, and then the stomach acid. Okay, I don't know why, I don't know what this looks like for you guys, but it's kind of set up weird. It didn't used to be this way. Okay, so let me try to make it bigger. Okay, so types of innate defenses. So physical barriers, so we're going to go over these. So skin, mucous membranes, chemical barriers, so saliva, mucus, gastric fluids. So the pH and the enzymes in those are what's going to protect you. Cells go through phagocytosis, and that protects you. Then we'll talk about inflammation response. We'll talk about fever, and then we're going to talk about some molecular defenses, so interferon and complement proteins. Okay, so barriers. So barriers are things that you're obviously born with. Okay, so they're physical barriers. So skin is a very good example. Why the skin protects you is because we have epidermal cells, and epidermal cells are layers of stratified squamous cells, and the top layer has keratin in it. So keratin is a protein. So they're dry. Okay, we're shedding it constantly, so we're sloughing away the cells from the top, and the cells are closely packed together, so it's hard for things to pass through or pass in between them. So the epidermis is a pretty good protective layer, physical protective layer. Okay, now the mucous membranes, they're going to line any opening. I don't know why they're going to line openings. Okay, so you can think anus, vagina, mouth. Okay, so they have mucus in them, and the mucus is sticky. So bacteria, viruses, they'll stick to the mucus. And then there are macrophages, which are big white blood cells that will engulf and do phagocytosis. So those are there to help protect you. Okay, so there's also hair to keep big things from going in, and then cilia, which are going to sweep the mucus up so that we swallow it. It gets to your stomach. Okay, we also have mechanical defenses and flushing. So when we go to the bathroom, so when we urinate, every time we urinate, that flushes out the urethra. Vomiting will help remove things if you eat something bad, and saliva has enzymes in it, so it has lysine enzyme in it that's going to help protect your teeth. So an example of the lack of saliva is some medications now cause dry mouth, and the dry mouth people with dry mouth and taking these medications and not having enough saliva, they end up with more cavities. So that's just an example. So there's lysing enzyme in there. So let me write that down. Lysing enzyme. Okay, now more barriers. Okay, so chemical barriers. So chemical barriers are pH. Okay, so the stomach has a really low pH, and that will actually destroy most bacteria that are in there. But it doesn't destroy some of the toxins that cause food poisoning. So botulinum, and Staph aureus produce toxins that actually they don't break down in that low pH, which is really abnormal. Okay, sebum, which is on our hair, so it's the oils on our hair, is made out of fatty acids, and the pH of it is low, and then the vagina, the pH is low. Okay, salt and sweat, that creates a hypertonic environment, so it's hard for organisms to survive in a lot of sweat or a high salt concentration. Okay, lysing enzyme, that's called lysozyme. Okay, so we find it in tears, saliva, mucus. Okay, so what that lysing enzyme actually does is it breaks the bonds between the sugars and the peptidoglycan. So pretty cool. It breaks down the cell walls. Okay, we also have a protein called transferrin. It's found in our blood. And if you see the ferric, so ferrin, okay, so it binds iron. So iron is an important cofactor for bacteria. So if we bind that free iron, it's not available for the bacteria to use it. Okay, we also have proteins called defensins. They're in the mucus and extracellular fluids, and they can form holes in the membranes of pathogens. So they put a hole in them, like a perforation. Okay, now review of blood. So some of you have had lots of this and some of you haven't. So this is blood after it was spun down. This is actually a hematocrit, but I wanted to use it so you could see. So erythrocytes are red blood cells, as a reminder. Leukocytes are white blood cells. Okay, and then the plasma is up here. So that's the extracellular fluid and proteins. Thrombocytes are platelets, and so they're going to be found in this little buffy layer. So the part of your blood that is specific for your immune system are leukocytes. Okay, and leukocytes are found in this buffy coat. So I want you to see that this is just a small fraction of your blood. So most of your blood is red blood cells. Okay, so now when we start talking about leukocytes, okay, we have granulocytes and agranulocytes. So granulocytes have grainy material in their cytoplasm, and agranulocytes don't. So granulocytes, we usually say Ben. Ben loves granny. So basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, and our book also includes dendritic cells. So agranulocytes, those are monocytes and lymphocytes. So this is a gigantic chart, and this chart shows you pluripotent stem cells. So these are found in your bone marrow, and they can give rise to any kind of blood cell. So they're actually very powerful, right? So depending on what's going on and what you need in cell signaling, okay, we have myeloid stem cells and we have lymphoid stem cells. So lymphoid are going to give rise to the lymphocytes, okay, and then the myeloid can give rise to everything else, okay. So there's a picture on here. I'm not worried that you know what they look like, but I just kind of want you to see this is a big chart. It kind of shows all of them and how they develop. You don't have to memorize any of that. Okay, now granulocytes. We're going to start with neutrophils. So neutrophils are also known as polymorphonuclear leukocytes, or PMNLs. So they're phagocytic. So they're going to guard the blood, the skin, and the mucous membranes. So they respond to tissue damage. If tissue damage occurs, they're going to go to that site. And their granulocytes actually have, their granules inside of them have these myeloperoxidases, so they have an enzyme in them that makes a toxin against the pathogen. So they make something that's toxic to the pathogen. Okay, so neutrophils. Dendritic cells are also phagocytic. So they look like neurons with dendrites. That's why they're called that. They're actually part of the adaptive immune response, and some of them are found in the skin. Okay, now eosinophils are mobile phagocytes, so they increase, their numbers go up if you have a parasite or allergies. Okay, now, oh, this doesn't look like I wanted it to look. Shoot. All right. So agranulocytes are, we have monocytes. So monocytes are the biggest white blood cell. They have a big nucleus in them. They're going to transform into macrophages if they leave the tissue. If they're in the blood, they're called monocytes. But they become macrophages if they leave. There's some fixed ones that are named specific to the tissue that they're found in. So there's some in your lungs, there's some in your brain, there's some in your liver that have specific names, and they're fixed. They stay there to help protect that organ. Then some of them wander. Okay, now lymphocytes, we can use this picture. So there's two types of lymphocytes. So there's T lymphocytes and there's B lymphocytes. So T lymphocytes are responsible for cellular immunity. Oh, my little stylus is not doing its best here. Cellular immunity. And then the B cells are responsible for humoral immunity. So they make the antibodies. So B cells make the antibodies. We're going to talk about that more. Okay, now inflammation. So inflammation is your body's response to a pathogen. So characteristics of inflammation are it's going to be red. The tissue will be red. There can be edema. Okay, so fluid in the area. It'll be hot. Okay, so here's what happens. So the stage is in acute inflammation. So you guys know what acute means. So it comes on all of a sudden. So we can have vasodilation. So vasodilation basically means the blood vessels are going to dilate and we're going to release histamine. Okay, so if we start here, if you cut your skin, right, the damaged cells, what they're going to do is they're going to release histamine and they're going to release bradykinin. So bradykinin is a pain chemical, pain signal. Okay, so the capillaries are going to dilate because of the histamine and they're going to bring more blood to the area. So when they bring more blood to the area, they're bringing white blood cells to the area. Okay, and it's going to flush it out. Okay, so the skin becomes warm and it becomes red. The capillaries become leaky, okay, and the fluids are going to accumulate, and that's going to cause the edema. Okay, so a blood clot is going to occur, hopefully, okay, and a scab forms. The bacteria could multiply in the cut. So what will happen is the phagocytes are going to enter, and they're going to move through leave the blood vessels and enter the tissue. So when they do that, it's called diapetesis. I think that's how you say it. I always want to say petosis, but they leave the blood vessel and enter the tissue. Okay, so phagocytic cells are attracted to the bacteria and the debris, and it starts gobbling them up. Okay, so phagocytosis is occurring. The big blood vessels are going to dilate, so it's going to increase the blood supply, and it's going to get redder and hotter. Okay, so eventually what's going to happen is the dead cells and the debris are going to be removed. The epithelial cells will go through mitosis, and they're going to start growing under the scab. Okay, and then eventually the scab will fall off, and then you might get scar tissue in there. Okay, so those are the steps in like a wound. Okay, now chronic inflammation is kind of scary. So if you think about it, so you'll have continuous pus formation and the tissue won't ever repair. So like the acute inflammation helps you heal, but if you have chronic inflammation, there's never time for it to heal, so it just continues to get worse. So it's like it's not benefiting the pathogen's not doing well, and the host isn't doing well. So it's kind of like nobody wins with chronic inflammation. So here's some examples of chronic inflammation. So we end up with this tissue that's grainy. Okay, so it's a pocket of tissue that surrounds the pathogen and it walls it off. So some examples are syphilis. So this is the first one, is syphilis. So this is called a gumma. So it's a wound, it just won't heal. Okay, leprosy, you have lepromas. So those are the lumps from leprosy. And then in tuberculosis, you get tubercles in the lungs. So these are calcified and they're walled off. So the pathogen is in those wounds or in those lumps. Okay, now a fever response is a systemic increase in body temperature. So it's caused by pyrogens. They could be endo or exotoxins from a pathogen, or internally, so endogenously, it could be from macrophages. After they gobble up a pathogen, they can release a cytokine that's called IL-1 or interleukin-1. So interleukin-1 will trigger a fever. So fever is good in some ways as long as it's not too high. So if you have a fever, it slows microbial growth, it inactivates the toxins, it increases the host's metabolism and immune responses, it increases phagocytosis, interferon gets released, and we'll talk about interferon in a minute. The lysosomes become more active, and then the patient is forced to rest because you're tired, you don't feel like doing anything. So a little bit of a fever is a good thing, because it allows your body to heal. Okay, now interferon is an antiviral protein. Okay, so it's considered a molecular defense. So it's not cellular, it's molecular. So what happens, it gets released whenever you have a viral infection. Okay, and it's specific to host cells. So it's specific to the cells, not to the virus. So if we look here at this little diagram, okay, so the virus infects the cells, okay, and the signal is going to go to the host cell nucleus. And the virus starts to replicate. When it does that, it actually turns on the host cell gene for interferon. Okay, so then the host cell starts making the interferon because it recognizes that a virus is there. Okay, and then interferon is going to send the message out that the cells are infected by a virus. Okay, so it binds to the surface to some receptors on neighboring cells. Okay, and then those cells start to produce more interferon or other antiviral proteins, and then the other cells are then protected. Okay, so interferon, so our body makes it naturally, but there are therapeutic uses for it. So they use it as an antiviral sometimes, and they found out that there's 3 different kinds of it, okay, of human interferon. So there's alpha, beta, and gamma. Okay, so they come from different kinds of cells. Okay, so, but what happens is one of them, this gamma, activates tumor destruction. Okay, so it works against cancer cells. So they thought that this would be a really good way to treat cancer, but it turns out it doesn't stay in the body very long. It breaks down. But they do use it for some things, so it is used therapeutically. Okay, now the complement system. So the complement system, it's a network or a system of proteins. They're made in the liver, and they get dumped into the serum and the tissues in your body. Okay, so they're non-specific. Now, what they do is they complement the immune system. Okay, so that's why they're called the complement system. So they complement what else is going on in your body. So, and this, to me, complement system is not, it's kind of complex because it's a cascade effect. And I don't expect you to memorize all this, but I want you to understand what it does, the overall effects. Okay, so one thing it does is called opsonization. So opsonization is actually like tagging some of the pathogens so that the white blood cells will engulf them better. Okay, so it's like marking them so that the white blood cells will gobble them up. So the phagocyte will gobble them up. So it's like tagging them. Okay, so they enhance phagocytosis. Okay, they create membrane attack complexes. Okay, so membrane attack complexes mean we're going to put holes in the membrane of the pathogen, and then the pathogen will lyse. Okay, they can actually neutralize a virus. So again, bind to the virus so it can't infect or replicate. And it also stimulates inflammation. Okay, so it stimulates the mast cells to release histamine. Okay, so there's a lot going on, and all of these little things are different proteins that are involved in it. Okay, so here is a chart. This is in the 10th edition, and it summarizes all of the parts of the non-specific or the innate immune system. So I like it. It's a good chart.